Hi, everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Victoria Nicola, where I chat to fabulous writer friends. And today I have my wonderful friend and writer, Faith Consiglio, who
Yay.
wrote this
Thank
amazing
you.
book, Where Ashes Rain, and we were going to chat about it today. Welcome, Faith.
So excited. Thank you.
Oh, man, what a journey to publish this book, huh?
Yeah, like
Uh,
6 years, I think.
6 years. That is incredible. How many reader, what are they called? Versions of this book exist? How many times do you feel like you
Oh,
had to edit it?
that's a good question. Well, I never really like rewrote it where I changed huge amounts of things,
Mhm.
but the first time I sat down to write it, I actually wanted 5 point of views, and it was just way too long for what I needed to happen. Like it would never get published as a YA fantasy. So I didn't write the whole thing though. I kind of like realized it. Actually, no, I did write the whole thing. And then I had to go back and take out the chapters of this one point of view, which I really loved. And I always want to tell this character's point of view still. Like
Oh, can you
maybe in a
tell me
sequel, I
who?
will. It's Thea.
Oh,
Yeah. So Thea is a really interesting character, and she has a lot of depth. And I really think her backstory is so interesting, but unfortunately, it was one of the ones that I had to kind of scale back. So it's still there and it's hinted at in her scenes, but I couldn't expand on it as much as I wanted to.
man, what a bummer, because I would have loved to learn more about Thea, because I did feel like in the end, when she appeared, I was like, oh, this is gonna be a major character, and then we don't see her until kind of the end ish.
Yeah, like what's she doing that whole time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, guys, sorry, real quick to interrupt you, Faith. There's going to be spoilers when we talk about this. So watch after you read the book, please.
Yeah.
um, okay, so Thea was the one. Who was the other person that you wanted to have originally the perspective for?
Um, the other one was Lilith.
Layla, the mother.
Yeah.
Ah,
In short, yeah, she's actually one of my favorite characters. I really wanted to say more about her, but it was another one that I had to scale back. Um, and then yeah, as far as like versions of the of drafts, I took that out, and then I would say I did 3 or 4 editing passes before I got an offer, and then after I got an offer, there was 3 or 4 more editing passes, and there wasn't any huge changes, but there were a lot of minor adjustments and things. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you want to briefly summarize what the book is about for people who might not have read it? Or, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, it's based on a fantastical version of ancient Mesopotamia. And it follows 3 teenagers that are growing up in warring kingdoms. And the story follows them as they're trying to navigate this world. And in the background, there's this curse that is set to destroy basically the entire world unless it's stopped. And it's going to take some cooperation between these warring kingdoms in order for that curse to be stopped. Um, and the kingdoms have very deep-seated hatred against each other from centuries of war. And part of the curse is that these dark spirits rise and they can possess men and animals to violence, to become violent, and they feed off of hatred. So they become stronger as hatred intensifies, which in a world with a lot of war, that's something that is bound to happen.
That's so fascinating that it's in ancient Mesopotamia. I wasn't sure what the inspiration was. So I'm glad that you mentioned where the kingdom inspirations are. And because you didn't mention this right now, but another part of the curse is the drought. there's a drought over all three
Mhm.
kingdoms, and
Yes.
water is very hard to come by.
Mhm.
And so it's a very like dehydrated place.
Yeah, so it hasn't rained, and that's another part that since the curse has been on the land, the rivers where they, that water the farmlands, everything is drying up, and that's obviously a huge threat that is becoming, you know, it's very imminent that people are going to start starving because there's not enough farmland.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? Did you ever think about the fact that you did the opposite of the Epic of Gilgamesh? Because that's like a flooding story, and this is a
Oh,
drought. And Epic of Gilgamesh is Mesopotamia.
no, no, I didn't. But is there a drought before there's the flood?
I don't know about them. I don't think so. I don't know.
Okay, I don't know. I'm not sure either, but um,
Not in the
that is
biblical
very,
version. In Gilgamesh, I'm not sure.
I mean, in general, the water and the rivers are like the whole civilization depends on
Mhm.
them. So it's like it's very precarious if there's flooding or if there's drought.
Mhm. Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. Did you use any of the specific Mesopotamian gods as inspirations for any of your?
I did read a lot about the different gods, and I did take some inspiration from it. I didn't use any like specific names, and
Mhm.
I kind of a little bit there's some like hybridization of those like myths and legends, and also more um Western religions too.
Mhm.
um but yeah, I use some derivatives of those names and then some characteristics. Like I think there is a god that's like associated with like wind and kind of like destruction, and that's something that I
Mhm.
incorporated in the villain.
Mhm. Oh,
I
that
think
that
there's
makes sense.
also forms of like um almost like the dark spirits, and there's some very interesting and very scary monsters if you look at some um ancient Mesopotamian myths
Mhm.
that I
Mhm.
tried to incorporate.
Right. Yeah, there was definitely some creepy moments with the rivers and the waters. Good job. It was creepy,
Hey.
but it was well written. Um, so okay, we've got the inspiration. That was like a big one that I wanted to talk to you about. Was there a specific war that you were inspired to write about, or just in general, the concept of war?
Well, I would say in general, yeah, I wanted to reflect on war itself. And I mean, one of the reasons why I picked ancient Mesopotamia is that it's one of those things we learn about in school as this cradle of civilization. And I was using it also as a kind of microcosm for the modern world we live in. Um, but in that same region, I would say the Middle East now, there still is a lot of conflict, like a
Mhm.
different kind of conflict. But um, that is something that drove me to write the book. I was in the beginning of medical school when there was a peak of violence and war in the Middle East. And besides the tragedy in that area, I also saw it extend to the life I was living. So my friends who had personal ties to the region became, they were very deeply affected by it.
Mhm.
And something that really struck me too was that there was so much deep-seated hatred and really fierce loyalty to different sides
Mhm.
of a conflict. And it made friends that I had that were friends with each other even stop being friends.
Mhm.
And that really impacted my impression because I was thinking, we are all friends here. Like, can we talk about that? And like, I was trying to understand both sides and like the history because I don't have personal ties
Mhm.
to that region. So I wanted to write a book that captured that kind of sentiment, like that deep-seated hatred that comes from centuries of war, where this cycle of hate keeps getting perpetuated, and then try to examine what are the forces that can overcome that, and can it be overcome?
Mhm.
And to me, that's the gift of fiction. It gives us this access to universal truths,
Mhm.
and that is why I love it, because writing, you can explore something in kind of a more objective way.
Mhm.
So this, hopefully people will be able to relate to sentiments in this book, because it resonates with something personal, but it's not, um, the technicalities of it, are their fantasy. So
Mhm.
that's why, um, that's really why I wrote it.
Mhm. Well, and it's such a timeless topic, and the hate that war generates. Obviously, we're in this crisis right now internationally as Russia, the politicians there invaded Ukraine, and um, this tragedy that's now ensuing as literally we're speaking. And it's the same thing. Cultures that otherwise have a lot in common and have common roots and have um, common languages and are very intermarried and friends. And I'm obviously Russian, and I have a lot of Ukrainian friends, and I even have some Ukrainian blood in me, from like a few generations ago. But so it's so intertwined, and it's so that's just another tragedy of seeing what's happened. Like I was telling you, obviously the loss of life is the biggest tragedy, and loss of property. But of course, these rifts that are being perpetuated, and now I know, because I went to a few get-togethers ever since this happened. I know that there's like family members who are like no longer speaking to each other because
Yeah,
like one family blames the other family for whatever, like whatever side they're on. They blame each other for like this disaster. And
right.
so, and it's just staggering because my personal opinion is, no matter what you believe, what side you're on, hopefully we all rise to the standard of like, we're in the 21st century, let's solve everything with diplomacy and not let it devolve into violence. That's
And
my
that gets harder and harder the more that there is violence, because now there's all these wounds that need to
yeah.
be
Yeah, it
healed.
just
Or
perpetuates. Now there's even more pain. Now there's even more, there's loss and grief and all that,
that you can't really take away.
no, and now there's grudges, and so it really is an awful cycle. And
Yeah,
it is nice in fiction when something miraculous happens, like the the hero's journey, something brings about some kind of amazing results. I wish it were like that in real life a little more, um
right. And I think that's why, I don't want the writing. I mean, sometimes you need an escape and that can be therapeutic, but sometimes within that escape, you discover something that resonates with how you're actually feeling in reality, in some ways more powerfully than daily living does. And that also can be therapeutic. So, if someone is just reading this book for entertainment, I'm hoping they'll find it, but I also think that it can feel fulfilling in other ways too.
right. And I think what allows people to see the other side's perspective is because you have two long lost twins literally who end up
Right.
accidentally on the other side of the conflict,
Yeah.
that
So
they're
that was a really important setup
yeah.
for me, because exploring this question of what can overcome this. I have identical twins that got separated at birth, and they grow up in the two most tense and conflicted kingdoms in the book. And I I mean, just the setup alone makes you wonder, like, can that relationship overcome this hatred? And like, they have both grown up seeing attacks on their country from the other country, and um like, can the fact that they are brothers and identical, like they can look at each other and see that they share the same blood, can that be something that can foster peace, or is it still too immense of a wound to ever heal?
I think that is a very interesting question. And I like how you dealt with it, that in the beginning, no, it was not enough. Like they still held their grievances against each other. And the only thing that made them understand, well, the particularly the Hadrian, right, who's like the more robust of the two,
Yeah, and like angry
and angry. And the only time that it managed to get better is when he saw the destruction on the other side, and they were now people he cared about. So that was really, I mean, that's really the compassion to the other side completely fizzles out when this kind of thing happens, because people only, of course, it makes sense. They're only focused on their own tragedy, and that is immense pain. But there's also something to be said to, I don't know, I mean, right now it's hard to say this, but it is an incredible transcending human experience to somehow eventually forgive, and move past it.
Mhm. Yeah. And the questions of identity for the characters in the book, and of course for people, because I think one of the themes is kind of feeling like you don't belong, which people feel that to varying degrees, but there's a character who is from a different kingdom being raised in the enemy's kingdom, so he never really feels um like he belongs.
Yeah, that's a
And what do you do when, like, you're trying to identify with a country, or in this book with a kingdom, and then the kingdom does something horrifying, which
Mhm,
Emery also has that experience, because
mhm.
she's pretty, like, she thinks pretty good things about her kingdom, and then she sees
Yeah,
the dragon
yeah, that they would never do
destroy,
anything. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's like kind of like also an identity crisis. Like, how can I have like patriotism or nationalism or be proud of where I'm from when I just saw what happened?
Yeah. I I was watching somebody who said something interesting the other day. She's like, ultimately, we're all in the same boat as humans, and to be like cheering on somebody else's misery, that's like look like being in the same boat with somebody, and there's a hole on their side of the boat, and you're laughing, pointing, saying, haha, you're gonna sink.
But you're
Well,
on the same
same
boat. Yeah.
boat. So everyone's gonna
That's a good
sink.
analogy.
Yeah, yeah. So I think ultimately that's
We're all
something important.
interconnected.
Yeah, we're all interconnected. Okay, well, maybe we can move on to like something lighter than war, since the heavy intense
My
topic.
friend told me this book like becomes very dark. I don't know if you thought that too.
Yeah, there was a moment where
Right.
the dragons are, wreaking havoc on Jor, and I was like, when is it gonna end?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah, but I mean,
I'm hoping it has a positive ending
it
though.
does, it does, and all the characters go through really good character development. And um, speaking of that, I already mentioned this question that I had to you, but there are some interesting like romance brewings in this book, and that's another question. Like a couple of them, actually, I had a question about almost all of them.
Okay.
So the one there, so Hadrian is having some interesting thoughts and feelings about his twins mother who adopted him, who's not his real mother, so she's not genetically his mother, but
Right.
who raised him.
It's very important that it was not like genetically
Yes.
incest, but
Yeah, so my question was, why did you choose the mother rather than create like a sister or something?
I wanted it to be complicated. And I
Mhm.
also wanted it to be a little uncomfortable for the audience. One of the themes in the book is that you can't always control who you fall for. And that I thought was a very stark example of that. And basically, once Hadrian leaves his kingdom and goes to Jor, most of the things that he feels and what happens to him, he does not expect, and he's like not prepared for. Like he's not prepared to sympathize with them.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going there. Spoiler: he's
Yeah.
going there to murder the king and queen. So then for him to actually fall in love with the queen instead was
Mhm.
just like so the opposite. And
Mhm.
I wanted that for Hadrian because the book's really about like just overthrowing your preconceived notions. But also there's this theme of, you know, love being complicated, and all the characters to varying degrees have complicated romances where they fall in love with someone that they're not supposed to, that they can't be with. And in this instance, it's someone like Hadrian really can't be with because
Mhm.
there's like a very obvious reason why.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and for him, like she he didn't know her, but for her,
Yeah.
that's like she thinks it's her son,
Yeah,
like,
it's
you
really
know,
creepy for
stepson.
her. Yeah.
So obviously, like that can't happen. But also she's a really important figure and character because of her, you know, she's kind of like she's the queen, but she has a kind of um like she's in the background. Her power is very um like seemingly subdued by the political system in
Mhm.
Jor. Um, and I just thought throwing this in there that he's falling in love with someone who is in this very specific like political position was also important, and you know would probably become more important in the sequel.
Mhm. Okay, so there will be a sequel because that was going to be one of my questions.
I do have a sequel drafted, and I mean, I don't have a projected date for it, but this book actually, when I plotted it, this part where ashes rain is only the first third.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I started writing it as I had plotted it and then realized that's going to be way too long, and I had to figure out where I could make breaks in it.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, that's a relief because I'm like, this feels like it needs to have another book. And then the other question that I had regarding the romance is Emery and uh, her two potential, like, well, she kind of had a crush in the beginning with, oh, what's his name?
Daniel,
Yes, Daniel.
I had to
Um,
throw in the YA love triangle.
yeah, you really
But
did,
it's
didn't
not
you?
really a love
But it's
triangle
not
because
really, yeah.
they're not at the same time, but yeah.
Yeah, and then I will say again, spoiler alert, I was really surprised by Daniel's early demise. I kept thinking that he was like that was a show, that was a charade, like he was just gonna resurrect.
Right.
Um,
So that
because
was the first like major shocking plot point that just, you know, like you think the story is going in one direction and then it's bam, like, okay, what is she gonna do now?
right. And also, I think because Daniel really makes it sound like he's got a plan. Like
Yeah.
he's got a plan. So it and he's like kind of a mystical character. That's why I said resurrect earlier because he's from this like ethereal place. Um
Right.
and so the fact that he's also technically God's son, right? Because technically that's
The
God.
sun god, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So like the fact that he does not resurrect feels weird because we're used to that in our own.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and one of the reasons why I did that was because I want I wanted this to kind of be like from Emery's perspective, like
Mhm.
she's in this world where nobody believes in that anymore.
Mhm.
And she's trying to cling to this faith in that being real. Then he appears, no one else believes him, but he convinces her. And so she goes and then he dies. So now all of a sudden she's alone in in her beliefs.
Mhm.
And that's a really difficult place to be. And in order to continue, you know, the plan that they had, or to continue acting as if that's real, takes so much more strength because nobody else believes it. And that's actually one of the main themes too, was faith. And like, can you believe in something even when everybody else is like making fun of it and not believing in it? And that was one of her biggest tests, because after that she's like, okay, well, obviously that was all a lie because he said he couldn't die. And it takes her a little while to realize, maybe she still does believe, but she doesn't know all the answers. And I wanted the audience to kind of be in this journey with her where they're not sure exactly if it's true or not until the end, and you find out.
Right. And I definitely with what's the other guy's name?
Athwan.
Athwan, right.
Mhm.
So he so there's obviously it's a longer, more serious romance rather than with Thaniel. Thaniel was like a teaser in the beginning.
Yeah.
With so Athwan, I was also kind of surprised for a minute when, okay, spoiler alert, he betrays her,
Right.
so he betrays her and then she gets arrested. I was definitely surprised. I didn't know if that just meant that he'd never really cared about her, so he was just like kind of liked her but not really. But I'm assuming I then later thought like that was part of his plan all along, in a way, to like go along with and like to watch for an opportune moment where he could intervene and help her. Is that what you were going for?
Yeah. So I think, again, like, since it's written as Emery's point of view, it's not something I can explain about Athwan. But so yeah, you could definitely have interpreted it like he betrays her, then he feels bad and tries to save her. But what I was really thinking was, you know, he didn't want them to ever get caught. Basically, Emery is living in Jor, which is an enemy kingdom, where if they found out she was the princess of Jor, she would immediately be, at risk, and meaning like taken hostage, potentially killed. And he doesn't know that she is the princess. So she doesn't tell him until a horrific thing happens. There's a dragon attack and they're, about to be separated. And then she tells him, which is like the worst timing ever to say something like that. So there's this question of like, does he betray her? Because in a way, like, he might feel betrayed by her because she just was lying to him. And then that betrayal scene happens basically the next time they reunite. So there is a question of like, is that what happened? But what I was actually more going for was that their underlying love still transcended these things. And he knows in the moment when they're both discovered and taken that there's no way that, she's going to get taken no matter what. Like, there's no defense.
Yeah.
But whether or not he does really depends on, what defense he comes up with. And he decides that if he comes up with a good enough defense and he kind of tricks them, he might be in a position where he can help her out of the situation. Because otherwise it's completely hopeless. Like, they're both going to be taken and probably executed. Or
that's where I was thinking. That's my optimistic nature where I'm like, no, he did it on purpose. He had a plan.
Do you remember that when I was talking about this, so we went to the New York pitch conference together, and we go through our plot, and I was telling the plot to, I think his name was Brandon. And when I got to that scene and I was like, he says that he was just faking it all along, the guy was like, oh, but he's lying, right? Like, he was like, no, he doesn't actually betray her.
I know, because nobody wants to be betrayed with somebody, by a loved one.
Yeah, and it's still supposed to be like a question for you and for Emery, but then what happens to him at the end, like the sacrifice he makes for her, is sort of supposed to solidify that he was always trying to protect her.
Do you want me to tell you what I think will happen in book 2?
Sure, I would love to know.
I think that he's going to be back just like the way Daniel transcended that ethereal realm and came to their world. I think that Athlon will come back too. That's my perspective. Or maybe, and like their romance will continue, or maybe he will stay dead and there's going to be like some kind of plot twist that even though Hadrian's at first in love with the queen, he might meet Emery and then they might have a thing. But I don't know. That's like my
Well, because Hadrian meets her at the end. So
he does
now
meet
it's
her
not
at
a
the
love triangle, it's a love square.
It's a love square, but the other two died. So it's a line. It's a line at this point.
Well, yeah, I think so. One of the things, like there's all these different characters and they only really start to intersect near the end of the book. And I think there's a lot more room in the sequel for there to be more interactions between characters. But also I really like your prediction, but I will say the sequel has like this whole drama unfolds in Erewhon. So, you don't know if Erewhon is real or not for the whole first book until the very end. So, spoiler, sorry.
There's gonna be drama in heaven.
But so like a lot of things start to unfold in the sequel about like, how did this war happen in a place that's supposed to, be perfect and not have any pain or suffering, and how did the villain become the villain? And it's hinted at in this book, but like how did he make it into the three kingdoms alive?
How did he
Do
appear?
what he's doing.
That's the age-old question about the whole, like, how did Satan appear in paradise, right?
Right, the fallen angel.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's good to have some questions unanswered.
Yeah, for sure. Dang, I was hoping you would like deny or confirm my theories.
I can't fully deny or
You cannot fully deny or confirm. It's like a
but yeah, I guess I can't say anything.
No, you can't. I know. But okay, two things. The reason I think that there might be an intersection with Hadrian, because have you read Brandon Sanderson's The Way of the Kings?
The Way of Kings. Series? I didn't read that one yet. I'm still reading Mistborn.
Okay, so in The Way of the Kings, which Mistborn is great, Way of the Kings is there's definitely a triangle, like a love triangle. And I mean, it's not really a love triangle because one of the the gal and the guy that she's not with technically, they just have a lot of tension and like romantic tension, but nothing ever happens with it. And she's with the prince. And I just intuitively know that there will come a time where something will happen and she's going to be with this other guy.
Yeah.
And I don't know what tragedy has to happen, but I just have this feeling that that's what's going to happen in the end.
It's a good idea. I mean, maybe I will take note of this. It's just there's so many possibilities that you can do because there's also identical twins. So it's like you can make this so complicated.
And did Thaniel go back to that kingdom or is he now dead?
No, so in the last chapter, when when they welcome Athlon, it's Thaniel that's welcoming him.
I didn't get that. Did I miss that? Did you mention
Thaniel? I don't say his name. I just say, here, I can look at it because I have the book.
I did not get that at all.
Which you could totally miss it. But basically, it's talking about the sun god.
The sun.
And he's looking at his son and thinking like, his time on Earth really, was difficult for him. And then he's the son who says, welcome to to Erewhon. And I actually, I had put in there like in earlier drafts for him to say, "I'm Thaniel, welcome."
Yeah.
But then I just didn't, because I was like, I guess you can infer that, or if you don't infer it, that's okay too.
I guess I'm too like thick skull to have
But
it.
no, but it's like, I didn't want to like say it outright, because I always want this, like a possibility. But
A
yeah, he
question.
basically, he went back, like he said that he was from there. Like if anything happened, he would just go back. And that's, yeah, what happened.
So yeah, there's so many possibilities now that Thaniel and Athlon are back in the picture.
Yes, and now they're together.
And now they're together.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah, so the other thing that I was gonna say, the fact that all the stories interlace toward the end, it's
Yeah.
it's funny because the book that I had come to pitch at that New York pitch conference, I had a similar, and I remember we originally had talked about that, because I was like, the stories are very separate until the very, like literally the last two chapters, when they start to interlace and things start to like really make sense of why there's these three characters.
Right.
And I remember one of my beta readers a long time ago told me that it felt a little bit more like a prequel than like the actual novel. Like, I mean, obviously
Right.
things happen and there's like a story arc and everything. It's just, it felt like a prequel because now the characters are together. Now they're going to go do something.
Right. That's a good
So
point. I think Casey, well, our friend Casey
mhm,
told me something similar. He was like, they intersect like at the end, but it felt like it was a setup for more of a story, like that it
yes.
was the first act.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, it's great because now we have all their backstories, and now you get to go into um the sequel, and we get to see how all these people intersect again.
That's, I feel like, reader's favorite part. Like that's also my favorite part. Like if you're watching a show, or you just like see all these
We
different
finally
characters, and
meet.
you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for them to meet. I
Mhm.
feel like that was one of the best parts of Game of Thrones, and why it was so good, was because of all the character interactions.
Yes. I
Which,
will say I predicted that Daenerys and Jon Snow would be together like in season one. I was like, they would make a good
oh,
couple.
so you had a long time before it
Gotta wait
happened.
a long time. See, that's why
So
I'm
your
like,
predictions come true.
my predictions go true.
I
Oh
just need to
yeah,
write 7 more books first.
no big deal. Come on, Faith. Yeah, I do love that a lot of Game of Thrones when they intersect finally, and you're like, wow, that like tingle, like, oh my God, I can't believe they
Yeah,
met.
and also the dialogue is so good between those characters, because there's so much build up when it's like two characters meeting each other,
Mhm.
and a lot of times like then you're like, oh, it can fall flat or just not perform to expectations. But a lot of his, like, it just made it even better, which is
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah, the dialogue. Um, okay, let me see. We talked about a lot of things. I got my answers, or as much as I could possibly get. Is there anything else you want to say about the book?
Well, one of the other questions that I get a lot is about Emery's illness.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, it kind of refers to her having these spells of weakness. And in the world that she lives in, there's not really a cure for it, but there's, various medical ways of maybe managing it. But as, a royal and princess in her kingdom, the queen especially like tries to, hide it, and she's like kind of like embarrassed by it. Um, and that was, for the character, that's like an inner struggle too, for her to feel like she's strong and able to do things despite that, and also like to find her own confidence while basically someone's trying to hide her for her weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an important part of her arc. But yeah, a lot of people have asked me what the illness was based on, and it was actually based on early onset multiple sclerosis, which, you know um, as a doctor, I always feel this urge to like make my characters have a disease or like something specific that I've studied before, and just like incorporate that because that's something I know about.
Mhm.
And then to try to reimagine like what would those illnesses be like in a ancient time or in a different world where maybe they wouldn't know how to manage it, or like what would happen. That's a very interesting kind of like side
Mhm.
like interest in crafting a world to me. um which I guess like if you think about it, a lot of fantasy stories, like the authors make their own kind of
Mhm.
diseases,
Mhm.
um and that can become a part of the plot also, and part of world building.
Mhm. That actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that was a question that I had. And the other question that I had was, I think, well, I forget who says it, like potentially to eat raw meat is like a type of therapy. Is that what they really did? Is that a fact, a historical fact?
So the reason why, I don't know. So there are a lot of things about medicine in ancient Mesopotamia that aren't known, or like there are some things that
Mhm.
survived, like some medical scripts, but not a ton. But the thought process behind that is that there's some like theories that basically multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease, which is basically like the immune system attacking itself. And there's some theories that this is less likely to happen if you are like infected by a parasite, because
Mm.
then like if you're growing up in a place that's less clean, or there's more like chance of having parasites, your immune system is basically so busy
Fighting
attacking these
it.
foreign
Yeah.
parasites that it's not going to attack itself.
Mhm.
So that's where that came from. I don't know if they did that or not at all. It would be so interesting to try to figure out if they did,
Mhm.
but I'm imagining that, um, if their like water supply was
Mhm.
not, I mean, like there probably was more waterborne
Mhm.
diseases
Mhm.
than there is now with chlorinated water
Mhm.
and that like regulation. So it's possible that that was like a method, but I don't know.
I mean, I've actually heard of that in modern
Mhm.
times.
Yeah,
There was,
well, yeah,
yeah, people do that.
there are people who do that. Yeah, that will like purposely infect
Yeah,
themselves with the,
with a parasite. Yeah. There
yeah.
was I think a while ago my friend was saying how she listened to this whole thing where this guy has I think he has a clinic set up in Mexico or some Central American other American country where um because he had a similar situation. He had like really bad allergies to where he was like allergic to every little thing that possibly could
There's
exist.
such an interesting talk about this with allergies too. Like, why is there not as many allergies in developing countries as there are
Mhm.
in countries like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe our like the level of sanitation actually does something to our systems where they
Mhm.
start
Like
freaking
our
out.
immune system's not used enough that it starts
Yeah.
attacking itself. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is kind of like a theory. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, I mean, I do think that I actually know this is so interesting. I know a woman who has a dog and she like keeps this dog ridiculously clean to the like standard of a human rather than an animal. And this poor dog has so many allergies.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I just like
She's doing
thought
an
about,
experiment on her
yeah,
dog.
I know. It's like you've literally just created an experiment with your own dog because
I wonder what the vet has to say about that.
yeah, I wonder too. So I just wonder if there is something like we need to have a level um
Of germs.
of germs.
People say that as like a, even when I was growing up, I remember someone, when I used to get sick a lot, one of my teachers was like, you just need to roll around in some dirt. And I was like, what are you talking about? But I think
Rub
that's
some
what he
dirt on
meant.
it.
There's this notion that like if you're not exposed to anything, then like you're gonna get more sick.
Yeah, I do think that that's a common thread in many countries and cultures.
Yeah, so
That's
it's kind of like a side interest. Like if you're interested in that, I was hoping to kind of
No,
evoke
that's great. I'm glad you brought that
our
up because that was
experience.
a question that I had, and I forgot to ask it. But yeah, I love that. And you know what's interesting? It's so funny because again, the book that I was pitching, the main character there also has a weakness. Like she faints often. She has a type of,
Oh,
but it is more related to the fantasy world. There was like a whole plot twist later on with that illness, but basically, I don't know. I was reading Emery. I'm like, this is just like my character.
but yet I really think it's a powerful world building tool.
Yeah.
And it's one that maybe not everyone thinks about right away. Like when you think, obviously, like world building, you have to go through political systems, religions, like food, dress,
Mhm.
um, like economy and all of these things. But like what's another huge part is our health. Like we
Mhm.
get sick all the time with different things. Like there's so many things we can get sick with.
Mhm.
So it's almost like weird to not have
Yeah.
anything go wrong with health.
Right. And have you heard of this? I'm sure you have because you're a psychiatrist, but there's this concept of like as a culture develops, there are specific psychological dysfunctions that appear in those societies. Like um in some historical book, they found that there was a problem with like it was a really absurd combination of symptoms to a modern human, and it was like a specific location in the Middle East, and it was like people trying to walk on walls or something like really specific
Oh,
and very strange to our modern world, but it was like an epidemic at that time, and for some reason it like the psychological dysfunction spread through their society, and then it like as their society developed and something happened, it disappeared. And
but it's
so
in a book.
it was I it was in like a psychology class I took. We had talked about how oftentimes psychological issues could be dependent on the culture that they're in.
That's such an interesting and actually really relevant topic because it's true that there's different cultural there's a huge cultural influence obviously on behavior,
Mhm.
and a lot of psychiatric illnesses are manifested in behavioral abnormalities. So yeah, I think it's so important. And also like even when you're assessing a patient, like um I'm trying to remember. I had a patient who was talking about seeing zombies, and
Mhm.
everybody was convinced that he was psychotic.
Mhm.
But then, we were talking about it more, and we were talking to family, like from where he was from, and they were saying how, that's kind of like part of their belief, like supernatural,
Mhm.
like how we might, I
Mhm.
mean, some people believe in ghosts as
Mhm.
being real and like they're not psychotic.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like that. So it was like something that when you take someone out of their culture and they're talking to someone who has no idea, like they could just be totally misunderstood. And
Mhm.
that's why we really need to raise cultural awareness and like not jump to conclusions,
Yeah.
and overdiagnose or over medicate someone who isn't actually sick by just like
Right.
getting that information.
Right. I think that's, but there's like, there's a whole, there's a cultural anthropology book. I forget again,
I would love to read it. I love anthropology.
so it's a really fascinating topic. Also, it's about a little girl, and I don't remember if she was Hmong or it was an Asian culture that's like a smaller Asian culture. And she had epilepsy, I believe.
Mhm.
And the doctors were trying, and they lived in America, and the doctors were trying to medicate her and do all these things. I think it was epilepsy. I could be wrong because it's been so long. Um, but the parents kept like, they were so confused as to why this needed to be fixed, because in their culture they believed that when a person had convulsions, that means like like a good spirit comes in, and they and
Oh.
there's like a blessing, you know. And so they actually take very good care of these people who are potentially sick, but they actually um like, I don't want to say worship them, but they basically raise them up to be on like a higher level in a way because they're like special. They're
Like
really
it's a
special.
sacred
It's a
thing.
sacred thing. And so eventually what happened was they kept going to all these doctors, and the doctors kept trying all these things and nothing worked. And so, and they, I think, because she had a very severe version of it, the doctors told them that she had very little to live, and she was going to, like, without their help, she was going to die within like a year. And so at some point they still took her out of the medical system and they kept her at home, and she lived a very, like, a while, like, I don't know if she lived into adulthood years, but she lived for years. And they just kept, because they took such, because she's sacred to them, they took such amazing care of her. Um, so it's interesting like that too, you know, the different perspectives. And I'm not saying somebody doesn't need medication if
Yeah,
they're
I mean, it's
sick.
like an interesting ethical
Mm-hmm.
question. Like we could have a whole
It is.
interview about that, about the ethics of, like when people's personal beliefs clash with standards of care, and um yeah, like what the implications of that are. And
Yeah.
even for patients who like refuse blood transfusions, but then their life depends on it, or there's so many ethical questions that arise in medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good question. And then, yeah. Okay. We're okay. I'm not even going to try because I have like another idea of what I can say right now about the ethical dilemmas of medicine and all that. But yeah, so that's really great that you took a modern disease in a way, a modern issue, and placed it in this historic um, fictional place, and kind of, you know, their reaction to that. So that's kind of
Yeah, well, thanks.
um, anything else? What are other questions that you get from people?
um I guess other questions are with about Thea, like did she ever really love Hadrian or not?
Mhm.
um which I think that she did, but that she's kind of more of a, like,
Survivor.
not manipulative, because that definitely sounds negative, but she's more calculating. Like she's not someone, like she could be in love with someone, but she would walk away from that if she had to. um Her mom is more like conniving and really orchestrated the whole relationship, but she did love him, but at the same time, like, she sort of is like seducing slash yeah, basically seducing his twin at the
Yeah.
end,
Yeah.
because that could mean her freedom and like her safety.
Mhm.
So you kind of always, one of the reasons why I wanted to build up her character more is because I think she's so fascinating, and she uses her femininity to survive in a place where it's often used to like weaken
Mhm. Mhm.
women.
Yeah.
Like at the beginning, they talk about how women are basically sold into marriage and don't really have any authority of their own. So she's trying to like play these cards and figure out, like, she's ambitious. And at
Mhm.
the end, her situation is kind of precarious and uncertain. So I'm excited in the sequel to explore what she's going to do and how she's going to try to regain some of that.
Are you going to add her perspective in the sequel?
Oh my gosh, I wish I could. I don't know I mean, I want to, but it might end up being too long.
I say you should do it.
But yeah, I'll see if I can, because there's so much to say about her. And
Because
then
I did feel like there was a lack about her. I really wanted to understand her more. And I also was wondering if she truly did have feelings for the twin, or if she felt, or if she was just opportunistic, you
mhm,
know, and was just playing the game in a sense because she knew she could use it to her advantage. Um,
right, which I think, like, she's not completely like heartless. Like she's not gonna betray like all of her feeling. Like she didn't like try to seduce the king, you
Mhm.
know, like because
Yeah.
you know that's so repulsive to her. Like she doesn't like go, you know, she has boundaries.
Mhm.
Um, but with the twin, I feel like she does at least like him,
Mhm.
Caleb. Like she does. Like she's like, you know, he's nice and he basically like tries to protect her. So there is something there, but at the end, she's like, I'm going back to
Right.
Hadrian because
Yeah.
that's, you know, that's
Yeah,
more
for
of
sure.
also like a safer choice to her. Like, does she want to stay in a kingdom where she's basically a captive and everybody could potentially hate her? Or does she want to go back home where she could potentially be the next queen and
Mhm.
she's going to be around all of her allies? Like, obviously,
Mhm.
that's where she's going to go. She's
Mhm.
very practical in that sense.
Well, and the thing that kind of made me think that she does like the twin, which by the way, I am awful with the names. What was his name?
It's Caleb. Yeah, I mean, there's so many names.
Sorry, no, I'm
It's
Caleb.
okay.
Yeah, I see Caleb. Um, I'm really,
At least I'm remembering them.
I know, good job, good job. Caleb. So what I was thinking that she did like him because even though they're very different, he's like the opposites attract thing because he's very soft and he's like a trained priest and he's nothing like Hadrian. He's just very kind and compassionate and maybe with her life story of surviving all these atrocities and tragedies, she gravitates towards that softness.
Yeah, that's a good. I was thinking of it more, I guess, a little more cynically. Like she sort of sees him as someone she could
As prey.
control. Yeah, because he's like a little bit like more empathetic and weaker. And in a way, Hadrian is more of a challenge to, you know,
Yeah.
get to. But yeah, I think that she does sort of see. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure she also appreciates the fact that he's like more gentle and
I was
like,
trying to think good things okay, about it.
yeah, right. She just wants to control him.
Well, I will say that I can't wait for in book 2 where Calum grows a bigger spine and like
Well, he's
some
going to
muscle.
have to because his kingdom's on the brink of a
Right.
civil war. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that development. Um yeah. This is a great book. Great job.
Thanks. I'm so happy that you liked it.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And it feels because YA could be sometimes a little um oh gosh, what are the words I'm looking for? Maybe predictable
Mm,
and I think there's a standard of, I'm sure like modern YAs that are coming out, they can't really be that predictable and they can't fall into the forms that have been kind of created in the past.
right.
Um,
What cliches can you
the
use? What can
cliche,
you still get away
yeah,
with? Yeah.
yeah. Like the fact that Emery, the only reason that she was really able to do a lot of things like to escape is because she had this supernatural being within her trying to do all these things rather than like she trained how to fight and she saved the day because she's amazing. So that felt a little more authentic to like what could actually, like, not that it could actually happen that a super being could possess somebody, but like something that makes sense and it feels a little more believable for the world that you've created.
Mhm.
um so I really enjoyed it and I felt like with the war themes it was a little more adult even though it is a young adult, but the war
Yeah.
themes kind of make it a lot more grave and serious topics, you
And
know.
dark. Yeah.
Mhm.
I was thinking that the plot is very much YA in that it's very fast paced.
Yeah.
Um, and it's kind of just, I feel like just keeps you
Mhm.
going. Once you get to a certain point, it's just
Yeah.
like a lot of things happen and it fuels it to keep going. Um,
I mean,
but
there are war stories, like even Divergent and
yeah,
Mistborn, there's wars and destruction in those stories.
is Mistborn YA?
I thought it was.
I think it is, but I actually am not sure.
I thought
But
it
yeah,
was.
that's actually a huge struggle. Like, if you're writing YA to make your voice the right age, like, not too adult, but also not too young.
Mhm.
Um, and then also like your characters are going to age throughout the story. So that's going to start to change. So then it's a challenge to keep it, that same YA voice for the
Mhm.
sequels.
You're right. That is a challenge in YA for sure, to like conform to a younger person's thinking, but they also have to grow.
Hmm. It
And
depends, I guess, how slowly everybody's growing up.
yeah. Uh, well, it's a fast-paced YA, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. But I did the part with her getting possessed was also going back to my psychiatric training, was also
mhm,
kind of like um evoking a lot of this, like, hallucination or feeling like you're not in control, and like a lot of things that, I mean, obviously not actual possession, but um for me, like, it was definitely evoking that.
mhm, mhm,
So I felt like, not that it was like fun to write that, because it was just like made it extra like creepy and
mhm,
sort of like um that's a huge obstacle for the character, and it like
mhm,
happens at like in the last third of her character arc, and like all this other stuff already happened, and then it's like, now this is happening, like what is
mhm,
going to, like, how is she going to escape that, because it's almost just like gets worse and worse for her throughout the
mhm,
whole story.
mhm.
So overcoming that and like figuring out a way out of that was I thought, like, raised the stakes for her a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. I did wonder how she's going to, at some point I was like, is she gonna have to like commit suicide and then end up in Erewhon herself? That would be a sacrificial death because
Yeah.
she killed herself so that other people won't, like, this entity won't use her.
Right, but it's like if she's possessed, like, can she even do that? Or
That's true.
yeah,
That's true. Ah, so good. Great job.
thank you.
Uh, so everybody, if you haven't yet read this amazing book, please do and write a beautiful review for it as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
feel free to DM me your feedback or questions, because if you have any, I would love to talk about it. I love to hear what people think about it, whether it's good or bad.
yeah.
It can be constructive. So,
You mean on like Twitter?
well, yeah, you could tweet or DM me on Instagram
Okay.
at Faith Consiglio.
Why don't you give, yeah, you'll just give me your handles and I'll put them in the comments down
Yeah.
below. So everybody can DM Faith, buy this book, and talk about it. Well, thank you so much, Faith, for coming on today and
Thank you so
chatting.
much. I love having conversations with other writers, especially. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And we'll have more chats, I'm sure, in the future sometime soon.
I hope so. Yes.
Okay. Bye, everyone. We'll talk
Bye. Thank
soon.
you.